see glimpses of truth thou hast for me.
I'm Kimberly French. I am the person who Nancy and Rosemary called when they decided they needed an editor. That very quickly morphed into much more of a writing partnership, which has been a real joy in my life. And that all started a couple years ago when Chuck Collins asked me if I would help Nancy and Rosemary with this manuscript. He referenced something I had written a while ago about a historical woman who I really admired and had called a saint. And he told me, well, these are my saints. And right away, I was taken with this story about a group of ordinary people who did something extraordinary. They scarcely had any income or assets of their own, and yet they bought a big old house, they paid off 2 mortgages, they rehabbed it, they added to it, they formed an intentional community, and they grew this really far-reaching organization in a really unconventional way, even radical way, and they called that mutuality. So over 30 years, they welcomed in 500 families who needed a home, and this is in a kind of a small little upstairs of one home. Most of those were headed by women. This was starting in the 1980s, just at the moment when homelessness exploded, and for the first time became a permanent fixture of our society. And then there was the personal story. A nun, straight out of high school, who rose up in Catholic schools and became this really talented educator for girls and women, and a mother of 12 who never attended college but became a beloved feminist theologian in many countries and a lecturer and author of dozens of books. After 30 years working, living, and loving together, Nancy and Rosemary lost that home. They were not sure that they could find another one they could afford here in Gloucester, just as many of their guests had as well. I couldn't help but fall in love with these 2 women, and I'm sure that's not a surprise to many of you here. I can just imagine the sparks that flew when they met for the first time at Joe Tecchi's in 1979. So I want to say for this community, what a privilege and honor it has been for me to have worked with Nancy and Rosemary and to help them tell their story. Nancy Schwoyer is a fantastic storyteller, and what a memory and a wealth of experience and information, and even now she's always teaching. I learned so much about housing policy and women's history and the Moonies and the fishing industry. Nancy is always so warm, and she feels so deeply, especially about injustice and people in pain. She often apologized when the tears would come on our weekly Zoom sessions, but I'd say, don't apologize. That is what this book needs to say. I'm also so grateful to have gotten to know Rosemary Houghton in the last years. Such a deep thinker and a lyrical writer. Reading her past books, I was blown away by what she wrote. For example, she called the will of God a religious concept of arbitrary magic that has been used to keep power over people without choices, but especially women without choices. She is such a badass writer. At one point, she gave me such a nice compliment. I'll treasure it. She said, "I wish I'd known you earlier in my life." Well, Rosemary, it's really the other way. I wish I'd known you earlier in my life. As the book says, and Donna just read, I will see you farther on down the road, underground or over. This book will not reach millions, but my hope is it reaches the right people, the next generation of Nancys and Rosemarys who want to serve and make a real difference in the place they call home. So thank you all.
glimpses of truth thou hast for me.